The summer air hung thick with cigarette smoke as I sat on my balcony in Sofia, flipping through American film magazines I'd saved up to buy. I was 22, working as a production assistant on Bulgarian TV commercials for 250 leva a month, about $140, and dreaming of something that seemed as distant as the moon. "You're wasting your time with these Hollywood fantasies," my father told me that night at dinner. "A girl from Plovdiv doesn't just become a filmmaker in America." I looked down at my plate of lukewarm shopskoss salad and knew he was probably right. But I applied to film school in Los Angeles anyway. That was 20 years ago. My name is Elena, and this is how I became a documentary filmmaker telling immigrant stories that no one else seemed to notice. The Los Angeles airport crushed me with its size. 5 times larger than Sofia Airport, it sprawled in every direction with signs I couldn't understand and announcements I could barely make out. I dragged 2 suitcases containing everything I owned: clothes, family photos, and my grandfather's old Zenit camera. My student apartment was a 400-square-foot studio in Koreatown that cost $900 a month, nearly 7 times my entire salary back home. 6 other Bulgarian students shared a 3-bedroom apartment 2 blocks away, but I wanted my own space, even if it meant working 3 jobs between classes. First you clean houses, then you clean editing rooms, then maybe one day you get to use the editing room, my first boss told me when I got hired as a cleaning lady at a post-production facility. I nodded and smiled, pretending his accent didn't remind me of the home I missed every day. Film school proved both exhilarating and humiliating. My Bulgarian film references meant nothing to my classmates. When I mentioned Binka Zeliaskova, they stared blankly. When they talked about Spielberg and Scorsese, I nodded as if I'd studied their entire filmographies, not just the few bootleg DVDs that made it to Bulgaria. My English, which I thought was excellent, betrayed me daily. "I'm sorry, what?" became the most common response to my attempts at conversation. One professor returned my first script with a note: "Interesting story, but please have a native speaker check your English before submitting." I cried in the bathroom for an hour, then stayed up all night rewriting it. 3 years into my American life, my student visa was running out, and I still hadn't made a film that felt like mine. I worked as a production assistant on shoots where directors created Los Angeles stories that never showed the Los Angeles I knew, the one filled with immigrants doing everything they could to stay afloat. One Sunday, I visited a Bulgarian Orthodox church in Eagle Rock. After the service, an elderly man approached me. "You're new here," he said in Bulgarian. "I'm Dimitar. I came in '89, right after the wall fell." Over coffee in the church basement, Dimitar told me how he'd been a celebrated engineer in Bulgaria, but in America, he'd spent 15 years driving taxis because his degrees weren't recognized. Now 72, he fixed vintage radios in his garage and sold them on eBay. "No one knows our stories," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "We're just those people with the funny accents who drive their Ubers and clean their houses." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Dimitar and all the Eastern European immigrants whose American journeys remained untold. The next morning, I borrowed a camera from school and went back to the church. "I want to make a documentary about Bulgarian immigrants in LA," I told Dimitar. "Will you be my first interview?" He laughed. "Who will watch this?" "Americans don't care about Bulgarians." "Then I'll make them care," I said. My first documentary, Letters from Sofia, followed 5 Bulgarian immigrants in Los Angeles. I filmed on weekends and edited at night after my paying jobs. When it screened at a small community festival, 20 people showed up. 15 were the film's subjects and their families. A reviewer for an indie film website wrote, "A technically rough but emotionally authentic glimpse into an immigrant community rarely seen on screen." That single sentence kept me going when my visa extension was denied, when I had to marry my boyfriend Marcus earlier than we'd planned to stay in the country, when my parents couldn't attend the courthouse wedding because they couldn't get visitor visas. The day I received my green card, I quit my restaurant job and took out a loan to buy proper camera equipment. My next documentary followed a Romanian physicist working as a janitor at UCLA while trying to get his credentials recognized. Then came a film about Albanian and Macedonian taxi drivers forming a community support network. Each screening drew slightly larger audiences. An Eastern European film festival in Chicago invited me to show my work. A small grant from a cultural foundation paid for better sound equipment. Marcus watched me edit late into the night and brought me cups of tea. "You know you found your calling when exhaustion feels like energy," he said. I nodded, too tired to speak, too driven to stop. The turning point came 7 years into my filmmaking journey. My documentary, The Mathematicians, about former Soviet bloc academics driving for rideshare companies, was accepted to Sundance. The theater was half empty for the screening, but among those present was a program director from PBS. 2 weeks later, she called. "We want to develop a series about immigrant communities with you," she said. "Your perspective is exactly what we've been looking for." The budget was modest by industry standards, $75,000 per episode, but it felt like winning the lottery. For the first time, I could hire a crew, pay my subjects for their time, and avoid maxing out credit cards to finish a project. The series, New Americans, ran for 2 seasons. Critics praised its intimate approach and the way it highlighted immigrant communities that mainstream media overlooked. Viewership numbers were never spectacular, but letters poured in from viewers, many from immigrants who had never seen their experiences reflected on screen. "I watched your episode on the Ukrainian nurse," one letter read. "I cried because it was my story too. Thank you for seeing us." Today, at 42, I run a small production company specializing in documentary films about immigrant experiences. We operate out of a converted warehouse in East Los Angeles where the rent is still manageable. My team includes a Serbian cinematographer, a Chilean sound designer, and a Russian-American editor. The American dream didn't unfold as I imagined on that Sofia balcony 20 years ago. I never made a Hollywood feature. I never walked a red carpet at the Oscars. I never became rich or famous. Instead, I found something more precious, a purpose. My cameras capture the stories of people who left everything behind to start over in a country that often looks through them rather than at them. My films preserve the voices of first-generation immigrants whose children and grandchildren might otherwise never know what their ancestors sacrificed. Last month, I returned to Bulgaria for my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. In Plovdiv, I visited my old high school. The film teacher, once my film teacher, had organized a screening of my latest documentary. The classroom filled with teenagers whose eyes reflected the same dreams that once burned in mine. A girl in the front row raised her hand after the film ended. "Did you always know you would succeed in America?" she asked. I thought about the years of cleaning houses and serving food, the visa anxieties, the nights crying from homesickness, the countless rejections. "I never knew I would succeed," I answered honestly. "I just knew I would keep trying until something worked." The next day, I found an email from her in my inbox. "Your story made me believe I could tell my own story someday. Thank you." Maybe that's the greatest success, not awards or recognition, but showing someone else that their dreams have a right to exist, that their voice deserves to be heard. If you're reading this and holding on to a dream that seems impossible, remember that the path rarely looks like what you imagined. The journey twists and turns. The obstacles appear without warning. The doubt never fully disappears. Keep going anyway. Your story matters. And somewhere, someone is waiting to hear it.